if you want to know how to flex a ski, if you want to know how to hit that jump that you see in X Games, you have to be a curious learner, and you also have to be a disciplined learner. Playing a pickup game of baseball, basketball, street hockey, whatever it is, there's an innocence in it. And I just think there's a lot of power in that. And he was exploding in the mogul field in front of me. And when I hit that mogul, I jumped over him as he was tumbling, and we both kind of ended up at the bottom of the run. And of course, the crowd was in hysterics.
Hi, this is Sifu Slim, author of The Aging Athlete. In this book, you're going to get to hear about two different groups of former high-performance athletes. One group, which is made up of 90% of the former athletes, does not do physical activity on a regular basis and tends to suffer the consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. The other group, which is made up of 10% of the former athletes, is doing physical activity on a regular basis and tends to thrive through the aging process, or at least has a better chance at coping with the aging process. We could have taken these folks to a lab and done all kinds of tests on them. Instead, we slowed them down and sat them down and asked them, in their own words, to describe why they're wired the way they are, so that we all, former athletes and non-athletes, can use some of their inspirational and motivational and mindset lessons in our own lives. I hope you pick up a copy today. You can go to theagingathlete.com, and when you have a chance to read it, I'd love to hear back from you to find out what your thoughts are on the stories of these aging athletes. So I'm Sifu Slim, and I am coming to you from Playa del Carmen in Mexico, on the Yucatan Peninsula in Quintana Roo. And hey, Dan Egan's, where are you right now, Dan?
I'm sitting here in beautiful New Hampshire, and I'll be in Montana over the weekend. So full-on ski season for me, coast to coast.
Can you slide over so we can see the snow through your window?
Yeah, I'd show you, but it's piling up so much. It's crazy. It's crazy.
So I just got done from skiing Colorado, as you know, and what I do is I have my ski stuff that lives near the airport in Denver. And so all I have when I leave wherever I am, whatever ski destination, is flip-flops. And so I'm in Denver at an Airbnb, and everything was honky-dory until I woke up to get to my early flight at the Denver airport. And there was 5 inches of, not Colorado, but very wet, maybe Pennsylvania, heavy snow out on my giant expedition and on the path and on the road. So I'm walking through. I couldn't wear like my socks or my wool socks on these flip-flops because they would have gotten wet. So I had to suck it up and wear these flip-flops, and I was freezing on the way down, and my feet got so numb that I couldn't tell if my flip-flops were on or off. And sometimes they'd get stuck in the snow, and I'm walking around scraping the stuff off of my car with no flip-flops on at all. And then I had to go back and find them in the 5 inches of snow. How about that?
Well, there you go. Keep trying to mix seasons, Sifu. You know, you gotta let go. You gotta embrace where you are.
Warren Miller could have used my flip-flop debacle as an opening or a cutaway to you doing your beautiful skiing down the 4 feet of snow.
And he would have come up with a witty comment about barefooted beach bums going to the mountains.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and how the ski people for ski movies found you, and how old you were, where you were, and what you had going on in your life, if it was exciting or not very exciting, before that discovery of Dan Egan.
Well, of course, we all know that Warren Miller is the godfather of action sports. He made his first films in 1950. His first movie was Deep in Light, in 1950. And just this past week, I showed the last film, the newest film, his 73rd film, on the last stop of the international tour. We had 700 people show up. And if you talk about a brand and you talk about a legacy, 73 years of ski films annually, it's quite a legacy. And of course, you know, as kids, we would always go to watch the Warren Miller film every fall in Boston at the Berkeley Performance Center. And as a young teenager, 1979, went to see the annual film, and my older brother was in it, which was quite a thrill to watch my brother ski on the big screen. Was quite a surprise to the rest of us that John had made the movie or even had been connected with the film. So that sort of opened up an avenue for me to dream about what it would be like to see myself in the movie. John went on to do a number of different films for Warren Miller in the early 80s. And in the 1985, we skied in our first film together. It was February Vacation, Sugarbush, Vermont. And John and I got a chance to ski for the camera. And yeah, we were struggling that day. We were falling a lot. I had never skied for the camera a lot. And the cameraman was getting pretty frustrated. It's a kind of a funny story because he said, you know, you Egan brothers, if you fall this time, you'll never work for Warren Miller Films again. And we were standing on top of a big mogul run at Sugarbush North. And it was February break. My parents were up visiting with all the other siblings. It was 7 of us kids. And so at the base of the run was the cameraman, a big crowd of people, and my family, my folks. And John and I were skiing down the mogul run. And halfway down, I could tell it wasn't going too good for my brother. He was spinning up in the air, looking me in the face. His skis were over his head, and he was exploding in the mogul field in front of me. And when I hit that mogul, I jumped over him as he was tumbling, and we both kind of ended up at the bottom of the run. And of course, the crowd was in hysterics. The cameraman was kind of covering his head, and my parents were there. And in the crowd, somebody yelled, "Who the heck raised these 2 characters?" And I quickly looked over at my mom, and she raised her ski pole and she goes, "They're my boys." And she hit the guy in the shins. And, you know, I always took that as a sign of approval from my mom that she understood we weren't going to be doctors or lawyers or other things. And maybe the ski thing had something. My mom was a gym teacher. So she really appreciated athletics, and away we went. So really from 1985 to well into the 90s, John and I were known as the Egan brothers and skied in countless Warren Miller films all over the world.
So at the time of that early 80s experience, what was going on in your life if you didn't succeed in the Warren Miller, if you were never called upon to join in that exploit on camera?
Well, I was a college student. I was playing soccer at a pretty high level, and my ambition at the time was to play soccer and to get my undergraduate and business degree, and hadn't really thought too much about rolling the dice on the ski career. When I finally graduated college, I played soccer for 4 years. And I was basically too short and too slow to go on. I then pursued skiing full on because I couldn't imagine my life without sport. Sport had always been part of my life. Sport had always enhanced my life, and the opportunity to ski, you know, really was just a roll of the dice to see if we would make it. You know, I was working ski bum type jobs. I was a condo night check-in guy. I was a dishwasher. I was doing those sorts of things as I launched my ski career, and, you know, had the benefit of really, 1, a college degree, and 2, the technological boom of the day was the VCR and the VHS tape, and quickly latched onto that and saw the power of video. and started producing and distributing videos for myself and Warren Miller.
Wonderful, Dan. So before that ski film, with all the pressure on you, had you ever had to perform for a camera in any way, any interviews, any exploits in soccer or graduation things where you had to speak before that eventful time with the cameraman and the crowd at the Warren Miller shooting?
It's that's an interesting question. Being a middle child in a big family, I think I've always been a little bit of a entertainer, and I had played in the school band and did normal things that kids do, but never really for a camera. And I think one, being with my brother, it was really natural for us to be ourselves, to kind of have high energy and be funny and joke. And so I never saw the camera as any sort of pressure. I saw the camera and myself as a partnership. I knew sort of the idea of framing and how I was to move through the frame. And we worked with the cameraman to sort of make things beautiful. And Warren was big on that. He always said that, you don't need graphics and you don't need special effects. You're shooting the most beautiful thing in the world, mountains and snow and skiers. So don't overdo it. And what you see with the GoPro now, it's shooting everywhere. It's not focused. It's not framed. And we shot everything like it was a still photo. We shot everything like it was a work of art. And I think that that's what you see in our footage is beauty. It wasn't always the craziest thing. It didn't have to be on the edge. It had to be beautiful.
Excuse me 1 second. If you compared surf, big waves around the world, Hawaii, Tahiti, and the filming that goes on there, sometimes they have a place for the boats that can hang off of the ledge, off the break, and be right there, filming and picking people up, etc. What do you think you'd say about comparing a surf shoot with a ski shoot in terms of difficulty and the conditions?
Yeah, I mean, really similar in a lot of ways. The water, of course, is always moving, and those surf photographers either used really big lenses or they were getting in tight with their camera housing to keep the camera dry. You have to remember back then, of course, the endless summer and everything we were doing with Warren Miller Films, we were shooting film. This is pre-video. So all of those cameramen that were shooting water and shooting mountains had many talents. One was keeping their film dry, keeping their film not exposed, and changing out roles in really difficult situations. That changing a roll of film on a beach with wind and changing a roll of film on an ocean, on a frozen tundra in the Arctic, have really similar characteristics. When they're in the dark bag, their head's not in that bag. They can't see. They're doing everything by feel. They're putting the film in the camera, winding it through the wheels, all those sort of things. So the cameramen were really talented. One, I know my friends that shot surf were great surfers, and my friends that shot skiing were amazing skiers. So sort of how they combine those two things is really fascinating. But it all comes down to the perspective. The camera captured the perspective of what the surfer and the skier saw and what we were doing. And that perspective, whether there was something in the foreground, a cliff or a tree or a pier, put you in the place. I think, when you shoot film, establishing location is probably the first thing any good cameraman will do, and establishing the setting. The other things that Warren Miller Films did so successfully was tell the story of how we got there, why we were there, and what we were doing there. they gave the viewer perspective in the narration. Sometimes it was comedy, sometimes it was made up, but it was all built around giving it perspective. So, you know, cameramen hanging on the side of a cliff with a rope for us was a common thing. Cameramen skiing along next to us was a common thing, but not before they established the location. And Warren was a stickler for that. If you went to a location and you didn't establish it, you didn't shoot the signs, the scenery, the architecture, the location, he would go crazy. And of course, the fear always on these things was that you wouldn't make the final film. So the pressure wasn't always on what it was like in front of the camera. The pressure was on what we bring back at the end of the day over a 3 or 4 day, 5 day shoot. And of course, weather was a challenge. So if it was snowing, we had sort of a default snowy plan for trees and, you know, what to do. If it was beautifully stunning, we were up early and out late for sunsets and sunrises. So all of those things came into play. And the producers at Warren Miller Films were very vocal and very tough. They had a very high standard. They used 1 minute for every 25 minutes shot of footage. Now, these days with video, most of those films are being made 1 minute for every 100+ minutes shot. Mm-hmm. So they're not as focused on that ratio. But back then, we were highly focused on how many minutes per 25 we were producing that was usable. And, you know, when you take a look at it that way, you're not just an athlete. You know, you are part of the production team. And that was the whole magic in the sauce.
The idea of the focus that you were forced to adhere to because of the film versus video, I think it's very helpful when it comes to telling the story and in the editing process. So if you've got to edit, you've got to mark all of your footage and make a list. And if the list is too long, it's hard for you to remember as a human being with limited capacity. How do you go back and tell the story and stay on the spine of the book, they say, or the spine of the story? How do you adhere to staying on that? And with film and with script and having that thing set up voluntarily beforehand, it helps a lot when it comes to the editing process.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, the editors are magic and magicians. And, you know, that was another part of the process that once I became to understand the editing process and how it came together, you can produce the front end so much better. If you ever sit in an edit and the cameraman is looking for a shot, you know, they're searching for a tight explosion or a big beauty shot, of course, time lapse, all those sort of things that they use to move the story along. And, you know, that whole process, that complete process is really important. So yeah, it's always been fun. It's what I love to do today. And it's always on my mind. I see the world as a film. That's how I see the world.
Yeah, I see the world as a scene. You know, if you show up to the restaurant, you know, what's the scene? You're with somebody, you're on your own. I usually have a book with me, and that whole, whether it's 20 minutes in the restaurant or 2.5 hours, there's a scene happening there, and life is a performance. So what are you going to do? You're going to be a lump on the log, which is fine. Sometimes you need to check out of the rat race and just regroup. And other times you want to give people a good experience, the people sitting next to you, the wait staff, the people who greet you, the host on the way in, you know, have that as part of your doing good deeds, being of good cheer. A minister in a church who was in his 90s when I went to hear him speak back in the 80s, when I was kind of searching for direction in life as a young dude, he said, be of good cheer. And so, you know, the idea of letting your light shine and all these things is, I think, is important. You can't do it all the time, but you know, there are times where it's important to let your light shine. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, all the time, right? I mean, that's really, that's really it. You know, people, you don't have a lot of time to leave an impression. And a lot of times we're not thinking about the impression we leave. And it's easy kind of to be, you know, bothered, put off, judgmental. My whole thing is to free myself of judging. And it starts with that interaction. It starts with how I perceive myself in that scene and I perceive others. And for me, sometimes less is more, right? If I focus, I narrow my focus and I'm not as bothered by what's going on over here or what somebody's saying, or, you know, and also I guess the big part of that is not, you know, I've had to learn over the years not to take things so personal. You know, it's not about me, somebody's having a bad day or whatever. You know, I have to take a step back and just kind of not take that as a direct hit and just kind of move myself through that space, through that scene.
So a little bit of reach out for anybody watching in the audience. I've been interviewing sports and athletic experts, the athletes themselves, sports psychologists, orthopedists, trainers, coaches. And if anyone out there can connect me to those types of people, have them reach out to me through theagingathlete.com, and we'll set them into the schedule, and we'll put together a nice conversation online. I think that some people are interviewers where they just ask questions, but in the process of learning, and also me being a coach myself, I'm always, you know, I'm trying to push the conversation and go a little bit deeper than just hearing the biographical reflections and the current reflections of the people with whom I have the occasion to spend that time. Today, we wanted to talk a little bit about free play, and I'm going to contrast that to performance. So as a young person, we may have from age 3 to age 8, or whatever that time frame is, where there's a lot of free play. And then along the line, we get coaching, or a parent or a brother. In your case, you had a brother, I think, who was 3 years older than you, John. So you're learning maybe about how to compete and how to get picked for the team and how to improve your skills a little bit earlier than maybe some other athletes. And then skills learning in junior athletes. So maybe you can share a little bit about your story in that, and how you have coached other young people about the process of free play and learning about discovering their own skills and their own enjoyment, as opposed to being inundated, let's say, with the high performance. You know, I have one contact who was coaching young athletes, and he found that his athletes at a very young age, like 8 and 10 and 12, their parents were signing them up with personal trainers, you know, an hour 4 times a week, trying to improve their skills. And that's when he said, this is getting a little bit too extreme for me. And he became a property manager. And so he got out of that sports coaching because of the seriousness at such a young age of the parents, and then indoctrinating their children about that, you know, the idea of, if you don't get picked for the team and you don't achieve success on that team, then what's it all about? So maybe you can share your thoughts on that, Dan.
Well, you know, growing up in a big family with a lot of kids, roughhousing and playing was just what you did. Your friends and the were your siblings, you know, that we grew up wrestling and, you know, playing like that. And, you know, we had a big room in the house before we had furniture. There was the big room, and in that room we did gymnastics, we did somersaults, we did handsprings, we did running and tumbling, and we played in that room. And that continued. My gym teacher in grade school taught us a square dance. We played dodgeball. You know, we played a lot of games that were strategy and action. And even, simple childhood games, Simon Says and things like that, was all part of the playing. And in my coaching, like, I'm amazed when I ask kids to do somersaults and they can't do them.
Yeah.
Like, I'm shocked. And we spend time with, middle school kids, high school kids doing somersaults. When I coach soccer, give me 2 somersaults, go get the ball. Like, though, that sort of athleticism and spontaneity is part of being an athlete. And you can't remove that from athlete. There's no separation between movement and athleticism. There's no separation between balance and athletics. There's no, and what I say in all my, we'll get to it later, my newest book and on my app and all those sort of things, is like, nobody ever taught me to how to hold my hands when I jogged. I just ran. And that's invaluable. And when that becomes mechanical, there's a piece missing. There's a piece missing. So, free play looks like a lot of different things. Free play looks like sweeping the floor. Free play looks like, doing your chores. It looks like throwing a ball, playing catch. And there's simplicity in that. I still love to shag flies. If somebody will hit me a ball in an outfield, I'll go get it. There was something to that, because you saw yourself in the place. I think athletes have to have a vision of themselves in the space. And the more time you spend in that space, the bigger your vision is of it. Recently, at one of my book signings, an old childhood neighbor came to the book signing, and his fence was, he lived on the other side of the fence at the ball field that we all tried to hit over the left field fence. All those balls ended up in his parents' yard, and it was just wonderful to see him and connect with those memories. Those memories trigger all of that free play. We weren't there as part of a team to practice hitting the ball over the fence. We were there as neighborhood kids hanging around. That's where we gathered. Free play looks like riding a bike, a scooter, skateboarding, all those sort of things. Playing in the waves, at the beach. Very, very simple things. Making a sandcastle is free play. So, and a lot comes together in those activities, but mainly it's the movement with the vision. You start something and you finish something, whether it's a sandcastle, there was a vision of what that would look like and you achieved it. Maybe the tide came in and you had to build a wall to protect it. All of these things can be used for metaphor for life, but they're used and they're taught so innately. And I like, you brought up the restaurant scene. I like to watch people move. I like to see how they move around crowds, how they dodge in and out. You can tell the athletes, you can tell the dancers, you can tell the ones that are not clunky on their feet, who are anticipating other movements. That's a big thing. And one of the things you can't teach, we spent a lot of time as kids playing handball, hitting the ball against and it bounced back and you hit it. And what it teaches, of course, one, it's fun, but two, you have to move to the ball. The innate instinct to move in the direction of the ball, to anticipate, all those sort of things are very simple. They don't require a lot of equipment. We just had a blank wall as kids in a city, and we had a tennis ball and we played handball. It wasn't organized. We were killing time. So I love that. I love that stuff.
Dan, are you familiar with the name GSP?
I'm not.
So GSP is a gentleman who walks around in his, he's an MMA fighter from Canada, George St. Pierre. and he is one of the best of the last 20 years, and walks around at a little over 200, fought a lot at 190, 195. And he grew up in Canada as kind of the runt of the neighborhood. And he had one gentleman, one older kid who was much older, who used to beat him up every day. And so it's very common in the martial arts and the fighting sports of kids that were getting picked on a lot, that got into these fighting sports and developed and didn't wind up becoming picker honors of other people, bullies, but it helped them with their own awareness and their own development. And so what he talks about is how he changes his training. It's a brutal sport, but I remember one time, maybe 10 years ago, he said, I'm going to do tumbling. So he went into a gymnastics center and he did a whole progression of a few months of tumbling to get ready, to get his mind thinking and his body adapting to different positions and, using things differently. And I contrast that with one thing that Mike Tyson said when he was in his early 20s, when he had already been training in boxing, training capacity for 8 to 10 years. And he said, this is incredibly boring. I do the same things over and over, and whereas Georges St. Pierre had the foresight, I think he was coaching himself in terms of trying the tumbling thing, to go get in and try something completely different. And I don't know if you've heard these types of stories, but in terms of training, most of athleticism is training. Roger Federer may be a little bit different in that they play, tennis players may play 30 weeks a year of tennis. So there's a lot of on-court practice, in terms of their competition. But for boxers and a lot of other people, it's all training. It's very little in a competitive, award. You're going for a belt or going for money type of a venue. Maybe you could share your thoughts on that, Dan.
Well, you're a tennis player. The British tennis player, I'm blanking on his name now.
Yeah.
I'm drawing a blank. His documentary on Netflix, he has injuries and he goes back to learn how to tumble, and that had been missing from his training, and he then gets into the pool and swims and learns how to tumble and swim. So I think that those things are so important. And I think as we get older, those movements are equally important. We need to adjust, right? I mean, as a kid's we have free play. Somewhere along the line, athletes need to learn how to play with fatigue, how to play under duress, so they can be mentally strong and keep their mechanics. You saw that in the World Cup when people would hit a penalty kick or miss a PK. Some had the mental capacity to do it and some didn't. And of course, Messi overcame a lifelong, unfortunately, he had known from missing some of those PKs at the World Cup. So one of the reasons why there was so much celebration around Messi was he finally achieved the World Cup, but two, he broke through some of the lifelong patterns he himself had dealt with as the best player in the world and failed on that stage. So that was a big mental overcoming. And I think, the athletes that can do that can transform and transcend those moments are the ones that understand movement and the mentality behind it. So there's a combination there. But these days, we've eliminated a lot of movement from sport. And a lot of it has to do with some of it's equipment. I know in skiing, our equipment has limited motion, not maximized motion. So it depends on the sport, of course, but I'm a big one in movement and play. And I always go back to my gym teacher / soccer coach that I had as a boy. the things that coach taught me were about how to carry myself, about character and athleticism. And the result of that was winning. He wasn't trying to teach me the game first. He was trying to teach me how to be a good guy first and a good athlete.
A good human.
Yeah.
Andy Murray is the tennis player who,
yeah,
he has a very similar build to me and Roger Federer, which is the thin build. And some of the thin build people, anybody can get injuries, but the thin build people without a lot of, especially for tall, there's not a low enough center of gravity quite often to handle all of the torque. And in the 70s and the 80s, it was more of a linear sport. So you'd hit from back to front on the forehand through the ball and you'd finish through. And then it became a rotational game where the force was developed with that quicker move and the open stance with the hips, which Pete Sampras and then Roger Federer, Agassi also, they pioneered that. And now it's a very, I would say, high impact sport. You could always get hurt in tennis, but nowadays it seems like you have to be a really functionally fit athlete with really, really solid, level hips, level shoulders. Everything's got to be level, and you've got to have therapists, exercise people watching you and testing you and giving you the proper workouts as you go from age 18 to 22. Talk about, let's say you've been playing since you were 8, so now you're 18. That's 10 years of, in many cases, 4 to 5 hours worth of physical stuff that you're doing for your tennis game, and then sitting in your school desk. So it's a sport that just in terms of tennis, that you can imagine how your body would not handle it well. And then because of all the abuse that you're putting through it and all the monotony, now you're sometimes going out and partying a little bit, which is, the opposite of the Tom Brady mode. But, how many people in the history of the last 60 years of athletes were the Tom Brady? I would guess less than 1%. I don't know what your thoughts are on that in terms of living a clean life, staying away from partying and staying up late.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think we're seeing more and more athletes wanting to play longer. Last night I watched the Babe Ruth story, and he actually played into his 40s. He wasn't very fit in his 40s, but he did play. I think athletes always want to play long. They, particularly the great ones, they can't let go and they can't walk away. And I think, there's a lot of things that allow our superstars to continue. But the big one is money. So, some of them have advantages. They have money, and they have access, and we don't know really what's going on behind the scene. I'm not a huge Tom Brady, even though I'm from New England, fan. I take the quote out of the Lance Armstrong movie: "If it's too good to be true, it might be too good to be true." So I don't know what's going on there. It's hard to say. I don't think we'll ever know what's going on there to make that body do what it's doing at that age. I would love to say it's purity and clean living, but I would be naive as a pro athlete to think that's true. I'm a little bit of a skeptic. There's a little fly shit in the pepper for me, Sifu. So I don't believe what I see. And plus, sports have changed a lot. So the hits, particularly in football, have changed. Of course, we're sitting on that terrible accident in Monday Night Football right now with the Buffalo Bills player. And, so we see the violence of the sport. So maybe there's a good reason why it has changed over the years. But I think the pro athletes, I don't know if they're my example. I don't. They're not, actually. I see the athlete, I see athletes that are everyday athletes. The guy who runs by my house, the ones who are living life and trying to stay fit. That's where my head's at. Those are the athletes I work with on the ski slopes. everyday people trying to do everyday things without the benefit of money and trainers and all those sort of things. I think the real athlete lives within us, amongst us, that are seeing sport for a release, not necessarily a profession, seeing sports as a way of life, seeing sports as a way to relieve the pressure of the day, to become a better person and to pursue that through their whole entire lives. So I think sometimes our hero worship of pro athletes is a little misdirected.
I'm trying to find the name of the American surfer who I believe lives in California, and he's not a young person anymore, but he's won so many times for the last 20 years. And one of the things he said is that if you compare me, I think he might have been in his late 30s when he said this, maybe 8 to 10 years ago. He said, if you compare how I live and you compare how the 20 and 24-year-old people live, they're out late at night and they're partying. That's the surf culture, and they're not looking at it the same way I do. He said, I was looking at it as this long career and achievement, and I enjoy it. So I'm going to do all I can to propel me to that type of success over a long period. And so that's in surfing, a very similar story to what I was sharing about athletes partying. I know Ronaldinho, I think he's Brazilian, who had all kinds of talent. When you watch him in some of the competitions when he was a kid, they were playing in indoor courts, and you can see that he's got the ball on a yo-yo and he's smiling the whole time. But when he became a pro athlete, maybe at age 18 or whenever he turned pro, it was the monotony of it that turned him into a partier as a young adult. And then I think he had maybe a 10 to 12 year career, but part of his trajectory was filling the boring void and the monotony with partying at night, where he could go back to his smiley, laughing, less concerned about performance self.
Well, I mean, a lot of course, child prodigies and a lot of kids, actors in any sport, any profession get swept up in the party life. I mean, these days, that's a well played story. And I think if you look at the Tony Hawk documentary, there's an athlete that well into his, there's an aging athlete that is doing it, and has done it for a long time. And I have a lot of respect for how he did it and his path, without sort of a players union, very individualist like the surfer, somebody with a vision. I mean, when you go back to building a sandcastle and understanding what it takes to complete something, I think once you start seeing yourself in the future and you can anchor yourself with intention and purpose into the future, then that brings self-care. And I think when self-care comes into the equation, and it's a question, for me as a young boy, I had to learn that coming out of my teens and into my 20s, what self-care looked like. But I had a lot of mentors around me that were willing to, step out and help and point that out to me. So I think when you look at, the combination of the aging athlete, self-care is a big piece of that. Purpose is a big piece of that. Intention is a big piece of that. And those things always come into play. It's anybody who is, struggling with pressure, and the pressure valve is a late night or a party or some other form of release, those are all lessons that person needs to learn. Hopefully they learn them. And I think when you circle back, there's a great documentary on Netflix called No. It's the no hitter. And the pitcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates was on acid when he threw his no hitter. But when you see the work he does today, you see the transformation of then the power of that experience. He's not laughing about that event today, but he is moving on from it and is helping people. So, everybody's got a path, and it's all valuable, right? I mean, that's the thing. It's all valuable. And that's where the judgment piece comes in, and how we help people through non-judgment. And that's where the mentorship comes in. That's where the example and the power of our own lives come in. And I know that that's been a powerful force for me. I grew up with a lot of adult athletes around me, and they mentored to me in a very powerful way. And I've stayed in touch with those people. I think that's, I've gone and had lunches and coffees with the old coaches and the people that helped me along the way and mentored me along the way. And I'm proud to incorporate their belief systems in my coaching, in my mentoring, and in my example. So I think discipleship in that way is huge.
Kelly Slater is the surfer whose
Yeah.
name I needed to come up with. And so I'm gonna have to watch a documentary and read a book on him, but fascinating guy. One thing I wanted to do before we wind this down is talk about, you mentioned the word pressure. So the pressure cooker in life. And I'm going to share a little bit about what I think the problem is with human development as compared to success in the sports world, business world, and in politics. So let's say we take a politician in the 1950s, Eisenhower or somebody, he's got a kid. And what is he telling this kid? Well, be honest. If you break something out in the backyard or in the garage, I want you to come and tell me, be honest about that. So this whole idea of telling the truth, if you didn't do your homework, don't copy the other person's homework when, in homeroom at school, be honest. And then all of a sudden you graduate and let's say politicians in the United States and in many countries are often they go through a 3-year law degree. And in that process, you're learning different skills. Lying or hiding the truth is now an asset, and it's completely different than an honest father raising you to be or mother being an honest kid, telling the truth. And so now you step out of law school and you get into politics, and politics is saying the right thing, saying what people want to hear, finding sponsors, even if they're horrible corporations that are doing deleterious things to the planet. Those are your sponsors, and there's where your tens of millions come from to allow you to stay in the political game. And then you owe them favors, just like a mafia person owes a favor. So there's politics. You go into an organization, same thing. You're the CEO or the CFO. You've got to make that company thrive and survive. And it's all about money and influence and getting favors and developing things ahead of time. There's insider trading, et cetera. And then the same thing happens in sports. You mentioned that you're not sure about Dan Brady. I remember there were some things about some things that he had 10 years ago that were supplements that were illegal that came in his wife's name and they were in the refrigerator, this type of thing. So maybe he's on substances, maybe he's got all kinds of stem cell things that are high technology that cost $1 million per year, which I'm not opposed to. I'm opposed to if they obtain that stuff illegally, through illicit means. But so this is the difference between raising honesty and then seeing how you survive and thrive in the dog eat dog cutthroat world. And maybe you can share how you handle that realization when it came to you, and what you think we should do about raising our kids in a balanced, appropriate way.
Well, I mean, there's a lot there, and there's I'm not waging a crusade against sort of quote unquote the institutions of life, whether that's pro sports or politically. I try and keep that thought so I'm not overwhelmed within my own realm. And the people that have influenced me and I can influence others. I think kids today, have too much of a sense of honesty in a way, because there's like the example of the kids having a personal trainer, like it's just like all of that has gone down to an erased innocence. And innocence to me is what we should be cultivating, not removing. The wonderment and the beauty of a falling leaf from a tree on a fall day, or chasing a snowflake with your tongue in the mountains, innocence. And when I see innocence, I recognize it. I call it out, like beautiful innocence, and we lose our innocence because of technology and the pressures of the world at a very young age. So I think, one, we have to celebrate innocence. We have to cultivate innocence, and, curiosity is where the learning is, and not the knowing, and I think there's a huge difference there. So teachers and mentors and coaches who are inspiring curiosity, are inspiring a learning that's at a different level. And if you want to know how to flex a ski, if you want to know how to hit that jump that you see in X Games, you have to be a curious learner. And you also have to be a disciplined learner, so that you hear the truth in how to get the mechanics right. That's trial and error. That's mentorship. That's coaching. There's a lot that goes into getting to the X Games, but what's the path? And of course, honesty is something that is part of that piece of it. I just think as a kid, I don't know that, growing up in the 70s, we were any less protected from, the mean streets, so to speak, or the way of the world than they are now. But I do know that, the intrusion that is technology is wiping away innocence. And I think somehow returning to innocence is sort of the key to all the things you're talking about, because if you're curious, you'll seek out whether something is true or false. And in that seeking is the learning. When you hear false statements, and to identify them as such is really important. And you see it again, just because it's so current, Monday Night Football, an announcer innocently said, we're going to return to play in 5 minutes, because that's been the pattern of the NFL after neck injuries, blown out knees, all these horrible injuries that ruin careers of athletes all the time. Now people want to judge the guy for saying it. Well, wait a minute. He was doing his job. Nobody gave him any information. He just was filling airtime. There was a tragedy in front of him and he moved forward. But we're so quick to judge today. And I think that those things make good banter for talk radio, but they're not etched in stone, And I think that when I talk about stepping back from judgment, that's what I'm talking about. Who cares? Let's care for the person who got hurt. Let's wish them well and hope everything is okay. But we don't need to judge those around them that didn't know what to do. A lot of growing up is not knowing what to do. And a lot of what you talk about, whether it's somebody lied or didn't lie, always comes back to somebody didn't know what to do. And they chose something because it looked like a good option. They chose a group of friends that accepted them. And that turned out to be a bad choice. so I think that we have to see the world through innocence. And when we do, it's easier to have compassion. It's easier to have empathy. And that's what the world, and that's what athletes need. When I see a young athlete, I was just with a bunch of them, trying to make the Olympic team or whatever that is, and whatever that pursuit is, and whatever somebody told them that pursuit was, I try to speak to them from the point of like, what is their experience here? What are they experiencing the starting gate? What's it like to be participating with that pressure, and get them to identify it. If they can identify it and they can give it a name and they can relate to the emotion of it, then they can start to either change it or enhance it. But until we raise the awareness of that level, that goes back to, everything that we've been talking about today, which is playing. And when you think back to playing a pickup game of baseball, basketball, street hockey, whatever it is, there's an innocence in it. And I just think there's a lot of power in that.
Wonderful. So ready for our next adventure is something that we can talk about maybe sometime in the future. And my idea is that, since I'm a fitness guy first and a sports person second, I had the chance to go out to the beach here in Playa del Carmen and move my body in the morning. And while I was working out, I did a little judgment, but it's because I care about the person. Maybe we talk about that in a future conversation. So I see a gentleman, a Latin gentleman, and he's with another contact, and he's got one of those large beers in a dark bottle, and he's at least 2/3 of the way done with that. Maybe he did some yesterday and some today. I would doubt it. I bet he did it all today. And I'm within 15 feet of him, and he's drinking and talking at 7-something in the morning. I'm exercising, and there's yoga people, there's meditation people, there's a sound therapist doing a therapy session with people lying down, meditating, and that with a sound therapy. And then we got this other person who's drinking. And so the next adventure for someone who's got what I would call an unhealthful practice or an addiction is a deleterious thing, in my opinion. I don't have a problem with somebody drinking, but not during the morning routine. Maybe the person just got off of work. There's another way that I could be wrong on this judgment. And I'm so glad, I'm so blessed and thankful that my default setting is one that I think is a healthful decision, a healthful opportunity that gives me the chance to have a good day and be well and activated in mind, body, and spirit. And maybe you can wind us down on your thought on that, and mention something about your book, your new book.
Well, I think what you witness when you see that is you see energy in action. And what you're witnessing is we live in a world of polar opposites. So where there's a bunch of healthiness, there's going to be a bunch of unhealthiness. They're connected. They're not different. They're connected. So when you have a lot of something, a lot of energy, you're going to have a lot of other energy too. And I see that interaction as fascinating. Here's energy of meditation and action and motion, and here's a different energy coming in. He's drawn to it. He can't walk away, he can't look away. Neither can look away. So I see that as an example of energy moving around the planet. And two things can be true at once. You can be unhealthy and healthy. They're not separate. And we always think, this is the problem with the idea of balance. Well, look at me, I'm doing this thing, I'm healthy. Well, wait a minute. In that thought, well, okay, I'm going to have a little ice cream, Well, wait a minute, that's not purity. That's, so a lot of stuff is we do to make ourselves feel better, which is fine. But understanding that two things can be true at once. None of us are an island of one thing. We're all made up of energy, and energy attracts energy. And energy creates energy. So I see that as an example of a lot of positive energy on the beach. And what does it attract? Some of it is positive, but not all of it. And maybe that guy walking on the beach, maybe that is his meditation. I don't know. Maybe that energy needs to interact for a reason. And I think, when you look at everything, the sun and the moon and the movement of the tides, all of that is related. And it all comes into having a purpose. And it's beautiful. That's the idea of it, right? It's beautiful. I once sat in a park with a Catholic priest all day, and we just sat there. And when you saw the energy that was attracted around that collar, around his being, around all of the different interactions that happened that day, and you saw it as energy, it was fascinating. It was fascinating. My newest book is called All-Terrain Skiing. It's 31 drills and skills for skiing and movement. It's broken into 5 sections: balance, upper body, power, agility, and fluidity. And balance, and basically, if you want more control in any sport, bring in movement. Movement equals control. So all-terrain skiing is just out. You can find it anywhere you get your books. And of course, on all the app stores, you can download my all-terrain skiing app. And in the app is all the 5 sections. And within each section are all the 5 and 6 drills, which have videos. So whether you're on my YouTube channel or you're on my app, there's all the examples of the videos there that are to be seen and used. And it's all based around movement, which this whole conversation has been about. And what I always say about movement is, like, I'm not really teaching skiing. I'm teaching movement while gliding on snow. And that's why when you look at my sections, you have balance, which I believe we're all born with. We have upper body, right? Calm and strong upper body, fluid and loose lower body. Power, which is the entire movement of positioning, like a tennis player. There's no one power stroke. The whole total equals the power. And then when you look at agility and fluidity, it's the dance. It's the grace of how we move around the field and how we move around our lives, how we move in and out of that scene, whether it's at a restaurant or in a movie. So all-terrain skiing with the app, it's a great combination. It's a package. And just to move this forward from where it was in the 90s, Sifu, when I first came out with All-Terrain Skiing 1, the book had flashcards in it because there were no app at the time. So it was a weatherproof flashcard for the chairlift. So I love innovation. I love what it's done for learning. And I appreciate everything you're doing for people and to bring this to discussion.
Wonderful. So the information is out. You're blessing us with the things that you've learned through your own performance training, your own balance, and your own coaching of other people. And you've got that in an organized fashion and entertaining fashion, so that we can thumb through it and app through it and read it. And I tell people, there's this expression with books: is it a quick read? And that expression to me makes me think that, there's something better I should be doing with my time than reading a book. I think books can be read 1 chapter a week. They can be read slow. You can go back and read page 10 over again when you're on page 50. I think this is a wonderful to use a book for your own enjoyment and to slow life down a little bit. There's a whole movement called slow living. Plants don't, from a seed to the tomato, it takes a long time. What's wrong with living a little bit more like a plant, where we can go through the season of skiing if we're living in a winter place, and say, hey, let's start out with plan A and then plan B, and we'll work our way through Dan's progression here on how to be a better mogul skier, how to be a better powder skier, et cetera, and learn this thing slowly, and maybe it'll stay with us longer than 1 week. Maybe we'll ingrain that into our future, and we'll have it again as a resource next year, and we're advancing as we age.
Yeah, I love it. I appreciate it. And it's nice to be with you. I hope you enjoy the beach.
I shall. We'll talk to you down the road. Thanks so much, Dan, and big aloha.
Okay, all the best.